My earliest memories are set in a home that felt more like a strict religious order than a family dwelling. My father ruled our modest house with an iron fist, portraying the archetypal patriarch, while my mother played the role of a staunch supporter, echoing his edicts with fervent agreement. In this world, a woman's strength lies in her ability to listen, Dad would declare, his voice resonating off the walls. Mother would nod in concurrence, her mantra being, "Your power is in your silence, not your speech." I was their sole child, Remy, ensnared in this tight web of restrictions. No friends over, no loud music, and certainly no dissent. Contrasting sharply with my parents, my grandmother breathed fresh air. Living just a few blocks away, she came from a different world altogether. Her visits transformed our home into a place of lightness and freedom. One day, as she tried to sneak me a chocolate bar, Dad sharply rebuked her, emphasizing the need for discipline. But Grandma sharply countered, "Discipline is one thing, Benjamin, but crushing her spirit is another." She never shied away from standing up to him, and their frequent disputes became the background noise of my upbringing. Despite the oppressive environment, there were moments of warmth. My mother taught me cooking, suggesting it was my gateway to a successful marriage, claiming, "A man wants a woman who can feed him well." Meanwhile, Dad's lessons centered around submission, often remarking, "A quiet wife is a happy life," without any irony. I quickly learned to keep my thoughts to myself, and at school, I became the invisible girl, seldom noticed by teachers or peers. Everything changed when I turned 14. Hidden away in my room, Grandma burst in, her eyes alight with determination, and declared, "Pack a bag, Remy. You're coming with me." Despite Dad's vehement protests, Grandma was resolute. "I won't watch you bury her spirit under your rules," she asserted. And with that, I was spirited away to Grandma's house, a stark contrast to my parents' disciplined environment. Grandma's home was a haven of chaos and creativity, filled with books, music, and constant laughter. "Here, you'll learn to speak, to argue, and to be yourself," she promised. For the first time, I dared to imagine a life different from the one I had known. Yet, old habits die hard. Despite her nurturing, the shadows of my childhood loomed large. I remained shy and reserved, finding solace in the anonymity of the internet. Web design became my outlet, a means to express myself silently. Living with Grandma felt like inhabiting an alternate universe. She urged me to find my voice and assert myself, but years of conditioning were hard to overcome. When she proposed introducing me to someone, I instinctively retreated. "He's coming over for dinner next week," she mentioned nonchalantly one day. I paused my spoon midair, filled with apprehension. "Why?" I managed to ask, my voice a whisper. "Because you're 32, living like a hermit. It's time you met someone," she replied firmly, leaving no room for debate. "But what if he's like Dad?" The question escaped my lips before I could rein it in. Grandma placed her teacup down with a gentle clink, her sigh filling the silence that followed. "Not everyone is like your father, Remy. I've known this young man's family for years. He's different." I remained skeptical. "And what if I don't like him?" "What then?" "Then you don't like him. But you'll try, won't you?" Her eyes conveyed a silent plea. Despite my reservations, I nodded. After all, what was the worst that could happen? The day he was supposed to arrive, I was a mess of nerves. I changed my outfit multiple times, paced my room enough to wear down the carpet, and toyed with the idea of feigning sickness. "He's here," Grandma announced, her voice tinged with excitement. Taking a deep breath to steady my nerves, I entered the living room. There he stood, somewhat awkwardly near the doorway, holding a bouquet of flowers. He was taller than I'd expected, his eyes kind, and his smile tentative. "Hi, I'm Anthony," he introduced himself, offering a handshake. "I'm Remy," I managed, my voice a whisper as our hands met. Grandma, ever the gracious host, swept into the room then, brimming with charm. "Let's have dinner." Remy has made her famous lasagna. Dinner passed in a blur, mostly led by Grandma's lively chatter. Anthony spoke about his job and his hobbies, which, to my surprise, included plenty of outdoor activities. He was normal, even nice, and he listened, truly listened, when I spoke, which was a rare occurrence. After dinner, we found ourselves alone in the living room, Grandma having excused herself with a knowing wink. "So, your grandma tells me you're into web design?" Anthony began, breaking the silence. I nodded, grateful for the familiar topic. "Yeah, I've been doing it for a few years now." "That's cool. I'm hopeless with technology myself, can barely manage my email," he chuckled, and it was an easy, infectious sound. We talked more after that, about everything and nothing. He asked about my work, showed genuine interest in my passion for design, and shared humorous anecdotes about his culinary disasters. The evening was more pleasant than I'd anticipated, and for the first time, I found myself hoping it wouldn't end. After a few more dates, I realized I was falling for him, and it was a feeling like no other, a whirlwind of emotions I'd never experienced. Anthony was everything I never knew I needed. Then came the day he introduced me to his mother. She was polite, though her smile was strained and her eyes scrutinized me as if I were a complex puzzle. "It's so nice to finally meet you, Remy. Anthony has told us so much about you," she said, her voice sweet but edged with something I couldn't identify. "Thank you, Mrs. Margaret. It's nice to meet you too," I replied, striving for politeness. Our wedding was simple, just as we wanted. However, moving into Anthony's family home brought a sense of déjà vu that unsettled me. It felt like stepping back into the stringent discipline of my childhood. Mrs. Margaret wasted no time in laying down the law, her expectations as towering and unyielding as skyscrapers. The first morning in their house, I awoke to find her already at the kitchen table, presiding over the morning like a queen holding court. "Good morning," I mumbled, still groggy. "Morning, dear. Now listen, we have a way of doing things around here. You'll start by taking over the kitchen duties, breakfast at 6, lunch at noon, and dinner at 7. And I expect the house to be spotless," she declared, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. The familiar weight of expectations settled over me once again as I nodded, wondering how I'd navigate this new chapter with the echoes of my past so resonantly present. As I acknowledged her command, a lump swelled in my throat. Just then, Anthony drifted through the kitchen, delivering a quick kiss on my cheek. "Thanks, babe. Mom's a great teacher. You'll pick up a lot from her," he commented breezily as if endorsing an innocuous routine rather than my daily ordeal. My mornings began in the dim pre-dawn light, striving to assemble a breakfast that might, just once, satisfy her exacting standards. After the morning's culinary challenge, I'd rush to catch up on my web design projects, the hours melding into a relentless cycle of domestic chores interwoven with my professional tasks. Evenings were reserved for dinner prep, catering to Anthony, who arrived home with his own set of expectations. Mrs. Margaret relegated herself to overseeing my efforts, her critiques sharp and frequent, pointing out any overlooked dust or an improperly washed dish. Compliments were an alien concept to her. Her language was criticism, each remark sharper than the last. The revelation of my earnings from web design worsened matters significantly. Suddenly, my income was thrust into the family pot. "You're part of this family now, Remy. It makes sense for you to contribute to the household," Anthony declared, extending his hand expectantly for my bank card. "I already contribute. I cook and clean," I protested, but he interrupted dismissively. "Yeah, but money is different. It's for the household, for us." His voice left no room for counterarguments, and from that moment, my earnings were redirected into his account. The money I earned, through hours spent designing websites and managing demanding clients, was no longer my own. The stark contrast between my financial independence and this new dependency gnawed at me. Despite earning well, I was reduced to asking for money to cover basic expenses. "I need some money for the market tomorrow," I would say timidly, hating every moment of the request. "How much?" he would ask, suspicion lacing his tone as if I were plotting an elaborate escape. "Just enough for this week's groceries and some cleaning supplies," I would reply, striving to keep my voice steady. He would hand me a limited amount of cash, always insufficient, ensuring I would have to ask again, a tactic to keep me dependent and controlled. This was not the life I had envisioned on my wedding day. I found myself caught in a relentless cycle of servitude, my earnings fueling a household that showed no respect for me, under the watchful eye of a mother-in-law who treated me more like hired help than family, and a husband who endorsed her every word. After months of this relentless routine, the day the pasta overcooked was the tipping point. Mrs. Margaret's scathing critique came swiftly. "This mush is what you call dinner?" I stood there, feeling diminished, more an admonished child than a wife. "Sorry, it just got away from me," I murmured. "Got away from you," she snorted as if I had said the most absurd thing. Anthony parroted her disdain. "Remy, you've been off your game. What's going on?" Their words stung sharply. Here I was, squeezing web design into any scrap of time I had, only to be chastised for a trivial mistake. "I'm doing the best I can," I insisted, though it felt like speaking to a brick wall. "Best? This." Anthony's laugh was short and scornful. That night, I realized it wasn't just about the overcooked pasta. It was about me, about how I was losing myself in my desperate attempts to please them. As I sat at my computer, my fingers flew across the keyboard, spilling my heart onto a web design forum, a place that now served as my confessional. Articulating my frustrations felt like releasing a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. A fellow forum regular, Jess, responded with an insight that stopped me in my tracks. "This sounds like psychological abuse, Remy. Have you ever read up on it?" Psychological abuse? The term echoed in my mind long into the night as I scoured articles and personal stories, each narrative mirroring parts of my own life in hauntingly familiar ways. By morning, when my grandma called, I couldn't find the strength to lay bare the full extent of my struggles. "Just having a bit of a tough time," I told her, understating the turmoil within. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" Grandma's voice carried her concern across the miles. "I know, Grandma. I'm just sorting a few things out. Nothing major," I lied, the guilt of my deception heavy on my conscience. I couldn't stand the thought of her worrying about me. After our call, I dove deeper into the study of psychological abuse, hiding the books from Anthony and his mother. Each page turned was like fitting another piece into the puzzle of my twisted reality, revealing more about the manipulation and control exerting its grip on me. I kept my newfound knowledge to myself, especially from Grandma. I didn't want to burden her with how dire things had gotten. But then, everything changed. One day, as I stepped out for some groceries, a brief reprieve from the stifling atmosphere at home, I was blindsided by a car. The impact was immediate and total. Everything went black. Waking up in the hospital, swathed in bandages and casts, I was disoriented and scared, yet relieved to be alive. That relief vanished the moment Anthony and his mother burst into my hospital room. Their faces were contorted not with concern, but with anger. "Great, just great. I've had to cook for myself because of this." "What were you thinking?" Anthony's voice was a venomous snarl. "And I'm stuck cleaning up." "You better not be planning to lay around here for long," his mother added, her so-called compassion as cold as ever. I stared at them, pain and disbelief mingling within me. "I was hit by a car. I have fractures. I can't just get up." "An excuse? Always excuses with you," Anthony interrupted harshly. "When will you stop pretending and start pulling your weight again?" Their harshness was nearly too much to bear, but something inside me strengthened over the past weeks of secret study and silent acknowledgement of my situation, refused to break. The doctor entered at that moment, his expression strictly professional. Anthony demanded, "How long before she's back on her feet?" "We have a household to run." The doctor glanced at my chart, then back at them. "She needs at least 3 months of rest. After that, we'll talk about rehabilitation. It won't be quick." Their outrage was almost palpable. 3 months? And who's going to pay for all this? Anthony's faux concern was almost comical. He turned to me, his words cutting deep. "If you think you're going to take it easy at our expense, you're mistaken. If you're not back in a month cooking and cleaning, we're done." That's when a miraculous clarity crystallized within me, and a calm, unwavering voice I barely recognized as my own responded, "Then we're done. I want a divorce." The room fell deathly silent. Anthony's face drained of color, and his mother looked as if she'd bitten into a bitter lemon. "She must have hit her head too hard," she muttered to her son, disbelief tainting her voice. They left soon after, their departure as dramatic as their entrance, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a newfound sense of freedom. Recovery was going to be a grueling process, but for the first time in a long time, it was a journey I was ready to undertake on my terms. Gaining clarity and devising a plan were the gifts my ordeal had surprisingly bestowed upon me. When Anthony arrived at the hospital, brandishing the divorce papers with a smug certainty plastered across his face, he anticipated a breakdown from me, a desperate plea for him to stay. Instead, with a composed resolve, I took the pen with my unbroken right hand and signed my name with a steadiness that even I didn't expect. "You'll be back," he sneered with overconfident arrogance as he left my belongings and laptop by the bed, a parting symbol of his dismissal. Yet, far from feeling abandoned, I felt a wave of liberation wash over me. I was finally free. In the weeks that followed, I returned to my grandmother's home. She welcomed me back with open arms, no questions asked, no judgments made. Her support helped me rediscover strengths I never knew I possessed. But the peace was short-lived. Soon enough, Anthony and his mother appeared on Grandma's doorstep, waving legal papers and demanding explanations, as if they had any right to intrude into my life again. "You can't just sue us." Anthony blustered, a mix of fury and fear in his voice. "On what grounds?" I countered, my voice calm but firm. "Psychological abuse, for starters. And for taking my earnings without my consent." "I have recordings, Anthony." "Everything," I stated flatly. The color drained from his face. "Recordings? Remy, please, you don't understand. This could ruin me," he stammered, panic rising. His mother, tears streaming down her face, joined in. "Please, we didn't mean any harm. You have to forgive us." It was almost surreal, seeing them so desperate, so fearful. For months, they had made me feel diminished and powerless, but now the roles were reversed. "No," I declared, my voice unwavering. "I want you both out of my life for good." As they retreated, Grandma looked at me with a mix of awe and pride. "I never knew you had it in you," she said. "Neither did I, Grandma," I admitted, "but I do now." After sending Anthony and his mother away, I was filled with a tumult of emotions, yet above all, there was a triumphant feeling. I had confronted them and turned their deceit and malice back on them. The impending court date loomed, but I was ready, armed with irrefutable evidence and a newfound resolve. The courtroom was a daunting space, its high ceilings amplifying every whispered word and shuffle of feet. Anthony appeared, visibly less confident, his mother beside him, her usual harsh demeanor softened into apparent fear. As the proceedings began, my lawyer, a sharp-witted woman with a no-nonsense approach, presented our case meticulously. Anthony's lawyer attempted to mitigate the evidence, painting him as a misunderstood husband who had been unfairly accused. When it was my turn to speak, I stood before the judge, Anthony, and the entire room, my voice steady and clear. "Your Honor, I thought I was living in a loving home, but it turned into a prison. The psychological abuse, the control over my finances, I have proof of all of it," I stated. Anthony's lawyer interrupted. "Your Honor, these accusations are exaggerated. My client has always had the best intentions." I couldn't suppress a scoff. Best intentions don't involve secretly recording conversations and controlling every aspect of someone's life. The judge silenced the room, reviewed the evidence I provided, the recordings, bank statements, and messages, and after a seemingly endless wait, he looked up. "It's clear to this court that Mrs. Margaret has suffered significant psychological abuse at the hands of Mr. Margaret and his mother. The evidence is compelling and supports her claims fully." The judgment was decisively in my favor. Not only was the divorce granted, but the vindication was profound. It was more than a legal victory, it was a reclaiming of my voice and my life. After the court ruled in my favor, Anthony and his mother were required to pay damages and reimburse every cent they had taken from me. Standing outside the courthouse, Grandma embraced me tightly. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered softly. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders as if I could finally start anew. News of the court's decision spread quickly, as it tends to in both small towns and large cities. Anthony's reputation swiftly deteriorated, and he became a pariah in the community. His bosses demoted him due to the unwelcome scrutiny, and his clients, one after another, disappeared, eager to distance themselves from a man now known for mistreating his wife. His mother, once a formidable presence in her social circles, found herself isolated as friends and acquaintances distanced themselves, leaving her to stew in her bitterness alongside a son whose life she had helped disrupt. As I embarked on this new chapter, I was determined to face the shadows of my past directly. Before even thinking about packing or searching for a new place by the coast, I found myself in the office of a psychologist, Dr. Micah. It was a step I had never imagined taking, but there I was, prepared to unravel the complexities of my life. Dr. Micah's office was a sanctuary, a serene space filled with books and plants, sunlight streaming through the windows. "So, what's been going on?" she asked during our first session, her voice both gentle and direct. I exhaled, a mix of nerves and relief flooding through me, grateful to finally speak to someone capable of guiding me through the chaos. My whole life's been about pleasing others, staying quiet, being the good girl. And then my marriage, it was more of the same, but much worse, I confessed. "We'll take it one step at a time," Dr. Micah assured me, her voice steady and comforting. Those sessions with Dr. Micah became my haven, a place where I could confront my fears and my past and begin the healing process. It was hard, certainly, but absolutely necessary. Gradually, I felt myself regaining control of my narrative for the first time. One crisp morning, over breakfast, Grandma and I discussed my future plans. Sunlight poured through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow on the maps and brochures spread out on the table. "So, where to first?" Grandma asked, her eyes twinkling with excitement and a hint of mischief. "I'm thinking the coast. I've always wanted to live near the ocean," I mused, spreading jam on my toast. "Fresh start, fresh scenery. Sounds lovely. And work?" "Going back to web design?" she inquired, sipping her tea. I nodded. "Yeah, but on my terms this time. Freelance, maybe. Pick up some new skills along the way. Who knows? The sky's the limit." Grandma chuckled. "Just don't go skydiving on me, okay? My heart can't take it." "No promises," I teased, earning a playful swat with a napkin. The laughter, the easy banter, it was healing. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity, packing up, bidding farewell to the few friends I had made, and preparing for the move. Leaving the safety of Grandma's home was bittersweet, but the thrill of a new beginning was intoxicating. The day I left for the coast, Grandma hugged me tightly at the doorstep. "Remember, you're stronger than you think, and you're never alone," she reminded me, her words a comforting echo in my heart as I set off on my new adventure. "I'll remember," I promised, my voice thick with emotion as I hugged Grandma goodbye. "Thank you for everything." As I drove away, I resisted the urge to look back. The road ahead, with its myriad twists and turns, seemed to promise new adventures and new stories. Settling into my new coastal town was like taking a deep, rejuvenating breath. The ocean became a steadfast companion, its roars and whispers soothing my soul with the rhythmic cadence of the tides. I found a quaint studio apartment perched just close enough to the water to afford me a mesmerizing view, my little slice of paradise. Starting anew was not without its challenges. Establishing a new routine, finding work, and making friends required a proactive effort. But for the first time in what felt like forever, it felt like I was living for myself. Each decision I made was aimed at bringing joy into my life. I immersed myself in the world of freelance web design, leveraging my skills to carve out a path to independence. Work was more than just steady, it was enriching. I began collaborating with clients who not only respected my expertise, but also valued my input. This new professional environment was a stark contrast to the days when I felt belittled and undermined. Now, I was not only acknowledged but appreciated, and every project completed added a little more to my sense of self-worth and accomplishment.